Hi everyone, we're going to get started now. Welcome to today's Rancher Overview Training. My name is Denise Shannon. I'm joined today with Josh Curl, who will be helping me answer questions. Josh, do you want to say hi?
Yeah, hey everyone.
So today's objectives, we're going to do a technical introduction to Rancher. I have maybe 6 slides in total, and I will be essentially demoing everything in Rancher. One thing we want to say is questions are welcome. So if you go to your GoToWebinar on the side, there's a little questions box where you can go in and ask your question, and Josh will be answering those questions as we go. If there's anything that a lot of people have asked to demo or look at, Josh will bring it up and then I can talk about it and demo it live. We try not to leave until all of your questions are answered, so this training is slotted for an hour. Sometimes we go a little more than an hour, but we will try our best to answer as many questions as we can. Before I start demoing, just a couple places for if you're new to Rancher that you should go look at. We have our docs, docs.rancher.com. Anything that I demo today, you should be able to find in our doc site. We have our forums site, so if you go to forums.rancher.com, you can go check out, ask questions, ask the community. The community is fairly active. We have a couple employees who are active on the forums to help people out as well. You can also join our Slack, so we have slack.rancher.io. Most of the company is actually on there and kind of looks around and pokes around to see what's going on. Besides us, we have a lot of active Rancher users where if you have questions about it, they can help you out. So today's topics are, we will be setting up Rancher. I'll cover over basically how to start the container for Rancher. We'll talk about how you set up access control, so that's like how you authenticate and lock down your Rancher server from the outside world. We'll go into creating environments, attaching how you can attach your private registries, how to add in resources or hosts. We'll create some stacks and services, some load balancers, talk about service discovery. We'll be doing mostly everything in the UI. I will give a little preview of what the API looks like, and then we'll do a little demo of our CLI, and then we'll cover over what is the Rancher catalog, and then I'll kind of really briefly go over how Rancher can help you orchestrate containers using like Kubernetes, Swarm, or Mesos. We do actually have a Kubernetes specific training, which will go into more details about what is Kubernetes, how does it work in Rancher, and demos in Rancher itself. I think our next one is in 3 weeks, or 2 or 3 weeks, so that's something you can look forward to. So let's get out of here. Okay, so the first thing I've done before this training, the only thing I've done is really, I have spun up about, I spun up 7 boxes in AWS right now, where they are all running RancherOS v1.0.2, I think. They're all set up so that they're running Docker 1.12.6, mostly because when I do my Kubernetes demo, Kubernetes currently only supports up to 1.12.6. But you can really start anywhere where you can start a Docker container. Rancher does support, so it could be, doesn't have to be in the cloud. It can be your own personal machine. You could do it in different clouds and have them talk to each other. As long as it's able to run Docker, you can basically use Rancher. And then on my machines, you can see on a couple of them, all I've done is pre-pull all the images that I'll be using today to ease or speed up the demo so that it will be actually faster and we won't be waiting around for the images to be pulled out. So the next thing I did is, so on this one machine that I decided to dedicate to run Rancher server, I've started the command to run Rancher itself. So I did a Docker run, it's detached, it's exposing port 8080. That's where you would be able to access the UI for Rancher inside the container. I put a restart policy of unless stopped. So basically, if this host was to go down or restart, only this container would be restarted automatically when your server comes back up. And then the container itself, so I've specifically used v1.6.1. So everything that I just talked about is actually in our docs under installing Rancher. You can see there's different ways you can install Rancher. So I've done probably what I call a plain vanilla install. So it is not an HA setup. It uses the internal database that is inside the container. It's really what we recommend for people who are just playing around or trying out Rancher. When you get into using Rancher in production, we actually recommend you use an external database. And so you can see the instructions on how to do that. We probably also recommend actually doing HA. You can't do HA without an external database. And then there's just a couple of ways of how you can set it up. If you want to point an ELB in front of it, if you have authentication, you're going to use Active Directory or Open LDAP, and you want to use TLS to connect to those servers, how you would have to start your Rancher server container, and if you're behind a proxy, what you would need to do. So you can cover over in our docs about that. The main thing I wanted to point out was the different Rancher server tags that are out there. So I've selected a specific version of Rancher server right now of 1.6.1 that is the same as what we currently have tagged as Rancher server latest. So latest will always be kind of, you can kind of think of it as a beta where, you know, whenever we push out something that's gone through our, you know, internal testing, at least our brief, like our minimum testing, it will tag it as latest. And then we usually let that sit with the community for a couple of weeks, because what will happen is, like, you know, we can't test every single combination of setups out there. So sometimes people will obviously test things that we didn't plan for, or, you know, is different than outside of our testing matrix. So usually when we get those, and we will fix those like major bugs, and then we'll probably put out another release, and then eventually we'll tag it as stable. And stable is what we recommend to anyone that wants to use Rancher in production. While we're doing all of our tagging, we usually also tag a bunch of RCs. We do not recommend ever installing any of our RCs, because those are ones where obviously it hasn't been tested. They're ones that we are still going through testing. There's almost guaranteed going to be something broken in it. So we really stress, please don't install those versions. Instead, install actual versions that are out there. So here you can see this is the command I ran to just install Rancher server. As I said, the UI will be available on port 8080 once you're there. So I can go to my setup here. This is my IP of my host, and then port 8080. When you get there, the first thing you're going to be asked is, will you let us collect information about Rancher? So this is our telemetry stats. We would highly appreciate if you allow us to collect these anonymous stats. It really just helps us give us an understanding of what Docker versions are people using, what kind of hosts and their OSs that are people using, what kind of container orchestration we should be focusing our efforts on. It just gives us a guidance on, you know, where should we kind of look forward to or spend more time on in terms of what the community and our users are using. So I'm going to uncheck this for myself, for my demo, because it's not really going to help us in any sense for my setup. All right. So once you go in, basically, you can see you are brought into what is called a default environment. There's a bunch of things up top that, if you're not familiar with Rancher, that I will cover in more detail in a little bit. But the very first thing is I want to go into the admin tab. So here there's a little red thing to say access control is not configured. So what this means right now is that anyone who goes into, you know, this IP is able to access my setup. Let me actually make this bigger so you'll be able to see it. Okay, so first thing I would do is go to access control. So for access control, you can set up and authenticate against Active Directory, Azure AD. You could do GitHub, Open LDAP, or Shibboleth. You can also, if you don't have any provider outside that you want to necessarily authenticate against, you can go into use our local, and what this does is it creates you basically create your own list of users that could be able to access Rancher, and everything is stored in our database. And so I will enable local auth. One thing to note, so like when you're obviously just playing around for development or you're testing out Rancher, local auth is the easiest to use. One thing we do not support is if I wanted to later disable local auth and then turn on, say, Active Directory later. We don't support that in the sense that we don't allow you to switch between authentication providers. Once you turn on access control now, if any of you try and go, let's say I went into Safari and I tried to go into my setup, now you'll be prompted to actually log into Rancher itself. Okay, so what that means now. So now I've logged in. I'm actually considered an admin. You can see under our accounts page, you'll see that I'm an admin here. An admin versus a user is someone who can actually access this admin tab. And we'll cover over what's in this admin tab. Since I have local auth, I can add other accounts. So I can add one for Josh here. I can decide if I want to put him as a user or admin. If you have chosen to authenticate with any of the other authentication providers, you won't be able to obviously add accounts. You would invite them. I'll show you ways of where you invite them to be able to access Rancher. But what would happen is after the person has logged into Rancher, they're automatically defaulted as a user. And then you would, if you wanted to promote anyone to an admin, you would have to come to this page, find their user. You can go and edit them so that you can promote them from a user to an admin. So that's just one little thing to note. So what is an admin have instead of a user? So as an admin, you would want to be able to do audit logs. So, as you invite users into Rancher, they'll be, launching services, deploying stuff, and you might want to be able to see making changes, upgrading, deleting, and you might want to be able to see who did what. So after you turn on access control, you can actually see in the audit log specifically who's doing what, and then you'd be able to basically kind of track down who did what. So like, for example, we've had it before where, in a shared setup, someone accidentally deleted someone else's stack. And so you're able to like use this audit log to figure out who is the one who did it, and then kind of figure out what happened and why they might have accidentally deleted the stack or service. Covered over accounts, so then there's processes. So, when you start getting a lot of users using Rancher, you might want to be able, your system maybe say, hey, looks like it's slowing down or there's something going on with it. You can go into the process tab to see, in the summary, these are the ones that would be probably running. I have none running right now because all of mine have actually completed. So if I go to recently completed, you can see all the ones that have actually occurred. So it won't look as interesting now, but if, when you get up and running as an admin, if you have a lot of users playing around with it, you would be able to see what is going on in your system. If you wanted to set up HA, this is where you would see details about your HA setup itself, covered over access control. And then these last two settings is machine drivers and the actual settings. I'm going to cover those over as we go through the demo itself, just because they kind of tie in with other parts of Rancher that make more sense when we talk about it there. Okay, so the next thing to talk about is, like, as I said earlier, we came into what is called a default environment. So what is an environment? So an environment is basically the ability to group your resources and isolate them. So a lot of examples we give is usually like someone might want to set up their dev, test, and production environments to isolate each other, and then you can provide access to these environments specifically to certain teams. So currently I have this default environment. In here I can add people, so I can add Josh to there. So, when you connect to the other authentication providers, we do the ability to have add your users or groups based on what your setup is in that authentication provider. When you add someone to an environment, you can also decide what kind of role they have. So we have 4 different roles. One is the owner role. So if someone wants to be able to add or remove people to the environment itself. You can be a member, which basically means you have access to do anything in the environment. You just can't add or remove people. We have a restricted role, which is people who are able to deploy and launch services, but they wouldn't be able to actually do anything with the hosts that you add into the environment. And then we have a read-only role, which basically means you can only look and see what's going on, but you wouldn't actually be able to stop or start any services or do anything on the host itself. So I'll leave Josh as a member, and then we'll save this. Also, the concept of environment kind of stems from what is called environment template. So to start, we have some default templates here that allow you to kind of start with any of the container orchestration. So I will show you kind of what that means. So when you create an environment template, I can create my own template where I can pick which kind of orchestration I want. Here is where you could also configure. So if I pick cattle, there's no configuration of the container orchestration. If I pick Kubernetes, you can edit it, and you can select different options for your setup itself, for your Kubernetes setup. Same with, I think, Mesa's SwarmKit Windows itself. And then what happens is, in an environment template, the reason why we allow you to create them is that you could essentially create templates of how you would want users to be able to set up or enable so that these, what we call infrastructure services, are always deployed. So if you wanted to set up external DNS so that you would be able to direct people to a FQDN instead of actually a specific host, you could set that up. You could pick what kind of networking. By default, we currently have IPsec networking. You could set up different storage drivers if you want, and then there are a couple of framework ones that are required in itself. So you could create your different templates of what you want to use. You could always just use our default templates, and you can start to add environments. So I'm actually going to add a Kubernetes environment into my setup. So now I have these two environments. So what is in an environment? Let's poke around. So here, if I go into my environment, you can see that I have these 4 infrastructure services. They're infrastructure stacks, which run a set of services that Rancher requires to be able to get our container orchestration going. And what I'm going to do, they actually can't deploy anywhere right now because there's no hosts in my setup. So hosts are basically Linux machines that you have somewhere that you want to be able to actually start deploying services onto. So I'm going to add my host. The first time you click on add host, it's going to ask what your host registration URL is. So this URL is basically where can my Rancher agent connect to be able to talk to my Rancher server host. So I'm going to save it by default. And here, basically, there's a couple of different options of how you can add hosts. So you can either have a Linux machine anywhere else that you want already started. So that's kind of like what I have, where I have my hosts set up somewhere else. And then you can basically, I can copy this command, which is basically a Docker. It's going to start a Rancher agent container. So we're going to start this container, and then it has to access certain things. Here you can see this is the image that we're using, and then it's going to have the URL and a token to be able to access. And then go to my machines and start those up. Besides where you already have, I already have these machines already set up, you can actually deploy machines through our UI to be able to basically launch instances in different cloud providers. So here you can see you could use Amazon, Azure, DigitalOcean. I'm going to actually walk through DigitalOcean for you today to just give you an idea of what it would look like and how that looks. So I'm going to just pause my screen real quick so I can grab my access key for DigitalOcean. So here what we're doing is, all we're doing is we're actually calling Docker machine. So if you are familiar at all with Docker machine, it's basically a command that allows you to launch these hosts. So we're just creating a friendly user interface to be able to get it going a little quicker. So I'm going to do 3 of my hosts in DigitalOcean. I'm going to click on create. So here you can see the 3 hosts that we already have set up that already have some containers running. Those are the ones that had pre-provisioned and pre-pulled images, so they're just getting up. The ones that I have up here that are named Denise123, these are the ones where now we're calling Docker machine, which is basically going to reach out to DigitalOcean. It's going to request for a droplet to be created. Docker machine will then install Docker into it, and then we will SSH into the machine and basically run the Rancher agent command that I had shown earlier on the add host screen. So under add host, you can see right now by default we have 4 machine drivers available, but you can go to, if you're an admin, you can go to manage machine driver, and this is that same page under the admin tab under machine drivers, and you can basically allow whatever machine drivers you want. So we have a bunch that are contributed from the community. There are some that we've done ourselves, so you can choose whatever you want. So I could, say that I don't want people to use Packet or Azure, and I only want Amazon and DigitalOcean to play, or to be active. So I can then go back to add hosts. You can see now that I've now limited the number of choices to be able to actually launch machine drivers. So outside of adding hosts, you can, in an environment, you can add your private registry. So under infrastructure is kind of like how you would want to set up your environment. So you can add registries. You can add your own private Docker Hub registry, your Clay.io, or if you have a custom one, you can add those all here. Once you add them into environment, basically anytime you try and pull any images, it will use the credentials that you have here, and you would be able to pull those images onto whatever hosts that you have added. Okay, I'm going to check my notes to make sure we're going. So we've added. So next we're going to start adding services. So now that everything is all set up and say I've invited everyone, you can actually start deploying services. So there's a couple things to do. You can either go directly to when you're adding your first stack, define a service. I could add my own personal stack. So I'll say blog app. Here you can just create your own stack by itself, and then you can start adding services directly onto it. I'm going to look up, there's a Ghost app here in Docker Hub. It's just a very simple blogging app. You can kind of look to see what the Docker run command is and what port is exposed inside the image so that you can access it. So the port is 2368. So in Rancher itself, what I want to do is I could say, let's run a couple of these containers. Let's call it our Ghost app. You can select the image, basically anything. When you start launching services, almost anything that a Docker run command can do, you can also do inside of Rancher itself. And so here I've selected just the name for my service. I've selected what image I want to do. As we said earlier, the port that's exposed in the image is 2368, so I can expose that same port so that when I go onto my hosts, I can schedule it, or sorry, not schedule, I can go to that host port and then be directed into the container. Here you can see always pull image before container. I'm going to uncheck that because I've already pulled all my images, but if you're doing development, you probably want to keep this checked out because a lot of times when people are developing, they'll use the same image tag as they make changes, and they'll just push onto that, re-push onto that same image tag. By default, Rancher will not re-pull the image if the image is already cached onto the host. But if you are reusing the same tags, you would want to leave this checked in so that anytime it starts a new container, it would always repull the image on the host. So like I said, anything in a Docker run command you can kind of find in our UI as well. So under command, there's volumes, networking, security hosts. That captures most of them. A couple Rancher specific things are being able to add in secrets. If you want to add in secrets, you would actually need to deploy one of our infrastructure stacks of secret management. We also have our own concept of health checks, so you can configure health checks for your services to say, if I always wanted 3 of these containers up and running, I could put a health check on it, so if one of the hosts accidentally went down, Rancher doesn't know that that container has specifically got down. All it knows is the communication between the Rancher server and Rancher agent container has been compromised, so it kind of assumes without a health check that the container for that service is still running and is fine. So you would configure health checks to make sure that you maintain the scale of whatever you want for your service, and the health check would automatically realize that once that Rancher agent connection is compromised, then you would be able to, it would assume all those containers on that host no longer have access, and then it would redeploy those containers onto active hosts. You can add in labels to your containers, and the reason why you would add in labels either to your containers or to your hosts is so that you could do scheduling rules. So I can add a scheduling rule to say the host must have a host label of, and I could put in log equals true. So when I create this service, what will happen is right now I did not label any of my hosts with any labels yet. I'm going to go to my health check and undo that. And I could create it. And what will happen is you can see that my service is going to fail because it's going to say that it needs a host with label of blog true. So what I need to go do is go to my hosts, and then I need to add some labels onto my host. I can add a label by editing the host itself. When you, as I can edit, oops, I made a typo, so it's still not going to actually be deployed. When you actually add in your hosts under the command, we actually have the ability so that you can add in labels so that as you add the host would directly get those labels. You don't need to add the labels in after every time. I just forgot to do that earlier. Let's see, I'm going to add a couple other labels for my demo. Okay, so right now you can see there's a lot of containers on these hosts that are running. These are all what we consider system containers. So if I unclick show system, you'll be able to see just the containers that have been applicable for my application. So here you can see that the Ghost app has been deployed on these 3 hosts. The reason why it got spread out across them is because I exposed a port on the container. So each host can only obviously be tied to one port or one exposed port. And here I can go into my service. I can click on one of the ports. It will redirect me to one of the host IPs directly into the container, and you can see I can access that. So then what happens is, like, if I wanted to, I want to scale this service up. So say I scale it to 4. What will happen is it actually won't be able to scale because I don't have any hosts that have the label as well as the port available. I'm going to edit this. If I add a label here, it should start to get deployed. Okay, So that is a very simple how you can start a service, how you can access it, exposing ports. So now I'm going to create another stack. I'm going to do a different application now where I'm going to create a service that is going to use, we're going to put a load balancer in front of it, and then you can see it load balance across those services. So first I'm going to add my host, sorry, not my host, my service. I'm going to call it app1. I'm actually going to use my coworker's, she has created an image that allows it so that if I go to a specific URL, what will happen is it will show me the container ID. Because I'm going to put a load balancer in front of it, I'm not actually going to expose any ports. I am going to create a lot of these containers. I am going to add in scheduling rules to say I want these all scheduled onto my hosts that have app equals true. So here you can see all my containers are going to get spun up onto the hosts that only have app equals true available on the label on it. So next, I'm going to add in my load balancer so I can actually access it here. And then I'm going to call it my load balancer. I'm going to say always run one instance on every host. Here for load balancing, so the Rancher load balancer uses HA proxy software. It is an internal copy or container that we maintain. It runs the HA proxy software. Right now, I think that the algorithm is always round robin between the containers. There's lots of options in terms of load balancing that you can do. So there is, let's see, you can expose your ports publicly or internally, so only with either externally on the host so that the outside world can access it, or internally onto the host so only people within the Rancher managed networking would be able to access it. You can do different protocols, so if you have certificates you want to use, you can add certificates into Rancher and then start to be able to use them for the different protocols. You can do host name, path routing rules, and you can target specific services. So I will just target this service. I use port 80. There's also selector rules, all about all of our load balancers. You can find more information in our documentation. If you're not familiar with load balancing, or if there's like an option you're curious if it does. So we're currently in our Cattle environment, and then under load balancers, you can either see our load balancing options that you would want to use in the UI, or what you might want to do in Compose or CLI, which we'll cover in a little bit. And here, the only thing I'm going to do is when you add scheduling rules, so far everything I've done has been in like what we call a hard affinity, so it must have a host label or something, so you can actually do must not have a host label, so I want them actually all on my other hosts that do not have the actual service app1 that we're load balancing to. I'll create that. And here you can see that they're starting to download. These will take a little bit longer than the other ones just because I have not pre-pulled the image onto these hosts, because I added these hosts into our demo live today. So a little bit about Rancher networking. I kind of briefly mentioned it, but I realized I didn't actually talk about it. So right now, I have these 6 hosts, and what Rancher does is we create an overlay networking where all of these hosts can talk to each other. So with our IPsec containers, what we do is we create this networking. You have to have on your hosts UDP ports 545 open so that they can talk to each other. And what happens is that I should be able to, let's show my system one, go into one of my hosts on one. So these are my hosts in AWS. I can exec into it, and I should be able to ping one of these containers that are on a different host that have a different IP. So each container is given a unique IP as well that's used for the Rancher networking. So this one's 185.45. So here you can see that the response between the two containers on different cloud providers are able actually to communicate with each other. Okay, so my load balancers are up and running. Here I can go to my load balancer directly, and you can see it'll go into my container, which is just an NGINX app. But like I said, it's not just an NGINX app. If I go to name.html, it gives me the container ID of which container I'm servicing. So I should be able to click on refresh. Sometimes there's, okay, I always forget. So sometimes there's caching issues and then it doesn't pull up a new one, but it should be redirecting between. This is actually, okay. I will promise you that it is load balancing between the two. I just forget how to clear my cache.
Private window.
You want me to use
New private, new incognito window.
Let's try that. Here. So here, that is a different cache it there.
Yeah.
So every time, so I could, okay, let's do this. So every time I go into it, if I pick out a new window, that IP is the same. That's weird. Okay, that's a little weird. This is the first time it's ever occurred in my demo where the load balancing cannot show that it's going across those, but or it is actually round robining. It's going between the ones. But here, you see I went to Safari, it's a different container. I do promise that it does redirect the traffic between the different containers. We could try and go onto our host to try and find them. But for the surface, or at least for the sake of time, it is basically going across these different containers itself. Okay. Let's see, what is next? Okay, so now everything I've been doing so far has all been in the UI. The UI is great. It makes it easy, simple. If you've never used Docker or Rancher before, as a new user, I found it very easy to understand, to get up and running. You might be a little more familiar, or as you get more familiar with Rancher, you might actually want to start using our API. So our API, you can go here, you can see the endpoints. So there are two different endpoints for the API. So there's our V1 endpoint and V2 beta. So V2 beta is really what everyone should be using. The reason why it hasn't been tagged as V2 is because there is still a naming discrepancy in the API versus the UI. So I'm trying to think of which one it is, because there used to be two naming discrepancies. We fixed one of them, we just haven't fixed the other. So right now, I believe it's in the API, what is called a project is actually what is the concept of an environment in the UI. So you can go to the V2 API endpoint, and here you can see all the different actions you can do. Here you can create account level keys. So these, this access is kind of Rancher at a higher level. If you wanted to, you could go into specific environments. So here you can see projects is under there, and that's the equivalent of environments, where I could go to my specific environment. I could go, now that I'm in my environment, I could go to services. I could see all the services that exist out there. I could create new services if I wanted to from the API. And here through the API, the UI of the API, you could like show the request to see what it would look like so that you could start doing your scripting. We have more details about our API in our docs under API documentation. There's more details of how you would use it. There's it's a little more complicated if you wanted to start from fresh in terms of how you would authenticate for access control, how you can make requests. There's all sorts of information about the API in our docs. Outside of the API, you could also use what we call our CLI. So you can download the CLI. So we have Rancher Compose and Rancher CLI beta. So there's also another one of those things where Most of our work in Compose is now moving to our CLI, so all the updates and changes are in our CLI. We started originally with Rancher Compose. That is just like a variation of our, I guess, interpretation of how to be able to use Docker Compose, how to use that within Rancher itself. So you could add in things to be able to sorry about that, we just had a small interruption. Okay, so you could run Compose files to be able to launch services if you're more familiar with the Docker Compose YAML format. Rancher Compose, a command at least of how you would launch those services, exists also in CLI. So CLI is kind of a layer on top of that where it allows you to manipulate a lot of things within Rancher itself. And so we haven't declared CLI off of beta yet because we wanted to really refine it and make the experience a little bit more user-friendly. But let's see. So you can download basically what version you want here. I think I clicked on it. Close some windows to make it a little cleaner. Navigate, so you can see that the version that I downloaded was 6.1. You can see there's the binary. So then what you can do is I can create what's called a Docker Compose YAML. And here, if you're not familiar with Docker Compose and like you want to get started and you want to start with just using the UI itself, what you can do is go into the UI. If you click on a specific stack, you can click on this little button right here, this Compose YAML. Here you can see essentially the Docker Compose, Rancher Compose equivalent of the services that you've done. So I'm actually going to copy these files and create them here. I'm just going to change what port is exposed. Save that. I'm going to create my Rancher Compose YAML. I'm going to change my scale. Change it to 20. Save that. Okay. So now, before you actually get started with Rancher CLI, what you'll first have to do is configure it. So here you can run Rancher config. Basically, you would put in the URL of where your Rancher setup is. You would create what's called an account API key. So this is where it probably trips people up the most. If you choose to use Rancher CLI, you will have to create an account API key. If you choose to use Rancher Compose, you actually have to use an environment-specific API key. And the reason why is Rancher CLI allows you and understands the ability to manipulate between the different environments, whereas Rancher Compose does not. Here, let's copy our keys. Here you can see it's already immediately knows that I have two environments in my setup and which one do I want to start up. So I'm going to select my default one. And now you can start seeing the different commands that are available. So let's see. With the Rancher command, you could look at what hosts are out there. You could see what services you have running. You could see which containers are running. There's a lot of commands that are available. I'm going to use the Rancher up command, which basically will bring up all the services in my Docker Compose file. So I'll do up. And then I have to pick a stack name. So CLI. So here immediately you should be able to see. My stack is up and running. The load balancer doesn't start until after all my other services started because it's linked to it. And you can see it's basically made the same application with just the changes that I did in the file itself, where I said I wanted 20 containers and I wanted to port 81. If I go to 81, I'll get that image itself. Okay, so then that is load balancing. Let's see. It's covered here, most of the things. Okay, next, I have our Rancher catalog. So now, I've shown you how you can add your services and create stacks on your own. You can create load balancers. But we actually have this concept of called the Rancher catalog. In our catalog, it has basically a lot of applications that someone else has already done the legwork and have figured out how to create a Compose equivalent of it so that you can start using it within Rancher itself. So you can see the community has contributed. I think we have close to 100 catalog items now. One of the cool things about the catalog that I like to show is that it kind of lets you start off with your application, and then as your application has differences or there's something new that you want to be able to deploy or upgrade your service to, you can just do that from a catalog template. Let's see. So I'll deploy Elasticsearch because I know that there's 2 templates. I'm going to purposely pick out the older one, and what happens is you can see from the preview, like, what is the Docker Compose YAML of how it is able to actually get up and running so that you can start using Elasticsearch. So you don't need to do anything. All you have to do is click on Launch. It automatically starts everything up, and you can see as it starts up that you have this ability to actually upgrade. What that means is in the catalog itself, that means our catalog service knows that there is an additional template that you could start to use, and you should upgrade or have the ability to upgrade to that. I am actually going to go back and just talk about upgrades by itself. So you have your service running, you realize you want to make a change, so you could click on, in the UI, you could click on upgrade. You'd be able to make changes to your service in terms of, like, maybe you forgot something on your container, maybe you forgot to add a label, or you wanted to expose a different port. You can select how many containers do you want stopped at a time before you start another new container. You can say how many seconds do you want in between when we start and stop containers. I think by default what happens is we stop one container and then we start another one. We wait until that container stops. You can choose to start containers before they're actually fully stopped if that's something you want to do. So upgrading you can either do in the UI. In our CLI, you can also do an upgrade for a specific service. You would basically make the change in your Compose file, and then you would do, it's a Rancher up -- upgrade to be able to upgrade itself. So everything that I've just said, you might not have caught, but don't worry, it's all in our docs. So if you wanted to look at how to upgrade services, there's upgrading services, how you do it in the UI, how you could do it with Compose. We have a concept of an in-service upgrade, so that is basically taking the same service name and just upgrading the underlying containers itself. Or you could do what we have called a rolling upgrade, where you could upgrade your service from one previous version and, like, stop that service and have a whole new service with a different name. Most people prefer the in-service upgrade because you can upgrade basically and keep the same name. And if you have, like, load balancers or anything linking or pointing to that, it would keep that as is. Okay, let's go back. So for our catalog here, you can see our catalog item is still, all the services are active. This is activating. It should go into active. Yep, there it goes. So now you can see I launched a template before, and now I can upgrade. I can pick, do the same template as before, or I could pick a new one. If I pick a new one, you would be able to then change your configuration options at the time if you want, and then I can click on upgrade, and it will start to upgrade the services that have actually changed. So while this goes, I'm actually going to, this is probably the last thing I was going to show in our cattle environments, unless there's anything specific that anyone wanted to see. I am going to go over quickly to our Kubernetes setup, where you can see that Kubernetes doesn't, you can't really do anything Kubernetes until you start to add hosts. So I'm going to just at least add our hosts into our Kubernetes environment. Then you can see shortly the host should come up, and then our infrastructure stacks will start to go. To launch Kubernetes, you can see there are a lot of services that we have that you can, we set up just to get Kubernetes running. So I'm going to let this go and run and start up. Hopefully it won't take too long because I've pre-pulled all those images beforehand. Back to our default catalog environment. So you can see that upgrading is still in progress. What will happen is everything, once you've upgraded, click on, you'll see that you have a combination of probably what the stop service is and what the old service and what the new one is will be there. That's what happens in an upgraded state where we won't remove the container yet. We'll just keep it around. And then after all the upgrade, the whole stack gets into an upgraded state. We'll be able to, this button will change from upgrade in progress to finish upgrade, and then you can finish your upgrade here. I guess now would be a good time to see if there's any questions or anything else specific that anyone has asked to demo.
Are you going to demo NFS today?
I can.
Okay, yeah, that was the main request.
Okay. Let's see. So I'm going to pause my screen for a little bit because I just need to grab my NFS. Well, here, actually, I'll start. So you could start adding NFS either directly from the catalog. So you go to catalog, library, and that will have your catalog. Oh, actually, speaking of catalog, let's get this deployed, and then we can talk about the catalog a little more. So here I have to get my NFS server and my directory line. Pause my screen real quick. Need to grab my credentials. So for the catalog itself, under the settings, I'm just going to talk while I grab this information. Under the settings, there is the ability to add your own private catalog. So right now we have, our library catalog. Those contain the templates that are required to get Rancher up and running, and then there is give me one second. There's our community catalog. That is what is under what our community has helped contribute. And then we have the ability to add private catalogs. So let's see. So I started my NFS driver to get that going. So under settings here, you have catalog, which allows you to enable or disable the library, community. You can add your own private catalog. So any catalogs you add here would be available to all environments. As of 1.6.1, which is the version I am running, you should be able to manage catalogs per environment. So I could start to add in catalogs that are made specifically for this environment. So if I have a dev, test, and prod environment, I could actually add in catalogs that are specific to those. If you want to read about how to create your own catalog or more information about catalog in our docs, talks about the concept of a catalog and then how you create your private catalog. So the setup of your catalog is actually kind of specific. And here you can see if I go to Rancher catalog, you can see under our info templates, let's pick a slightly easier one to look at. You can see that we have 4 existing templates that are probably across different versions of Rancher that are applicable. Inside each version folder, you have a Docker Compose and Rancher Compose YAML. So you can read more about how you can set it up. There is actually someone creating an open source project so that you could create the base directory of your catalog just through this project. You could start there and then be able to easily update and add your applications into it. Okay, let's go back. So NFS is up and running. Let's just finish up the couple other things that we were talking about earlier. So for Elasticsearch, you can see, like I said, it says everything is now in an upgraded state. You would want to check to see everything is running before you click on upgraded, finish upgrade. and then it'll basically remove all the old containers, and your stack and services would be up and running. I'm going to create a new stack. I'm going to add a service. I'm going to launch. Actually, I'll just launch so that this runs on every container. It's great. Oh, of course. So I created it, but I actually didn't add in my volume driver, so that wasn't very helpful. So I'm actually going to upgrade it. Oh, I should wait for it to become active. So once it becomes active, actually, you know what? Instead of upgrading, I'm just going to clone this service, which saves in everything that you had before. I'll have to give it a different name. And here under volumes, I'm going to add my volume. So for using NFS, or I guess any of the volume drivers, the one thing that you would first want to do is like you put in what you want your name volume to be. So I'll do Denise demo 068, and then you put in the path in your container, and then you can pick out what volume driver you want. So this actually recently came up across our community or users. So here I'm going to demo being able to use the volume driver of Rancher NFS. If you don't put a volume driver in, that essentially means that you're going to use the local volume driver. The one caveat is that when Rancher schedules out the containers, it actually doesn't acknowledge, or if you choose the local volume driver, what happens is wherever your services are created, it's going to just create a new volume on that host and start to use that volume, which means across the containers, in that service that are scheduled across different hosts will not be sharing the same data. If you want to use the local volume driver, you yourself would have to schedule to say all your containers must be scheduled onto the same host. So that's one note that I want to throw out there. Here, when you use Rancher NFS, it doesn't matter because the whole purpose of using one of our volume drivers is the ability to schedule your services across the host and have them all share data. So let's create this one. I'm going to go into here, and you can see they should all spin up. You can see I have one on every single host that I have running, so I'm going to exec into one of my hosts. You can see that we've created the Denise and container path. So if I create a test file, I can save it. You can see that it exists. So I'm in my demo one, the first one of my containers, -1. I'm going to actually go into -4, and exec in. You can see again, go into Denise and container. You can see my file is there. You can see the contents of the file there. I can actually change the contents in this container. And what will happen is if I actually go into my first container where I had originally created it, I can exec into that and show that the contents has been changed and updated in that container as well. So I could keep demoing where I could go between the containers, but that should give a very quick overview of how using one of our volume drivers persists the data in that path that we have across the different containers. Okay, let's see. I think that's, okay, I know it's 11, so obviously if you have other meetings or somewhere else to go, please feel free. We are, I think, almost done unless there's anything else people want to see. I'm just going to go into our Kubernetes environment real quick. It looks like Kubernetes is now up and running. Everything is active. You can go to the Kubernetes UI. You could see the dashboard. You could start deploying services here. You could go, if you wanted to use the CLI, you could start using the CLI directly either in Rancher. You could actually generate a configuration so you could work on your local machine. I'm not going to go into too many details now that we have a specific Kubernetes training that covers this in more details, but that at least gives you a high-level overview of how easy and quickly it is to get Kubernetes set up and to actually start being able to use Kubernetes. I guess now I'll see if there's any questions or anything else that people want to see or do today.
No other requests so far.
Okay. Usually this is like, everything that I've shown today is usually like of what is requested, at least showing a little bit of Kubernetes and showing Rancher NFS. I don't think we ever have anything else that we demo on top of this. The Kubernetes training is, I think, in 3 weeks. On another Thursday, it will be
2 or 3 weeks, yeah.
in 2 or 3 weeks. You can probably find it on our website. I can probably look for it here. Let's see if I can find it myself. If not, I can always complain to our marketing team, which they love when I do. Let's see. Of course, it's not. That was good of you all then. It's on June. I'm not sure what day it is again. June 28th, something like that. Anyways, I can try when after the webinar. Usually, like, we'll send out a link to say this is recorded, and then in that email, I'll ask our marketing person to advertise what the Kubernetes training is. So that should help. If we do run this specific training, which will cover the exact same content, we run this every month. If you know, obviously I cover a lot. If you're brand new to Rancher, you're welcome to attend again to see if you can glean more information. These are recorded. They do go up on our website, so you can watch them again later. You can come back just to ask questions. It's, you know, we're very, you know, we want to help the community get up and started. I know there's a lot of information, so please come back again. We are both on Slack. Our community is really active, and just try and reach out. Otherwise, I think that's everything we have to cover today. Where on the website are the recordings located? That is a great question. Let's see. I hope under training, it would be under there. Oh, this is where you sign up. I'll have to figure that out. I'll ask her to also post out where the recordings are. There are some older recordings that I know are on YouTube, but the newer ones are actually on our website. So, okay. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.